Hello everyone. In this video for the Kombucha Lab, we're going to talk about alternative hypothesis and discussion and the explanation that needs to go with both of those. So alternative hypothesis and discussion are secretly almost the same thing. Alternative hypothesis, right, is what you think is going to happen and why, and discussion is what actually happened and why. And so the way that you write them and the type of information that you need to provide is really, really similar. So this video is going to walk you through those to hopefully help you get all of those points. These are going to be drawn from pages in the lab manual, so you can go to the lab manual and follow up on this if you would like to. You can always, of course, also ask your instructor as you have questions. So you'll remember in this lab, we're using explanatory variable and response variable, instead of independent and dependent. And so the alternative hypothesis will include both values of the explanatory variable. You might remember that the explanatory variable is going to be like the category of the thing that you're changing. And so in this case, with the experimental strawberry jam jar and the control white sugar jar, the thing that was changed was the type of sugar, the type of sweetener, the type of carbohydrate. The type of thing is what was being changed. I didn't change the strawberry jam because that wouldn't be able to be used as a label for both jars. So the explanatory variable is going to be the type or category of the thing that is being changed. And then the values are going to be what was specifically measured for each jar. So for the control jar, I measured out white sugar and put in, and then for the experimental jar, I measured out strawberry jam and put in as the sweetener. So you have those, and then you have the response variable is the thing that you're measuring to see the change, which in this case, in this example, is concentration of yeast. You have the direction of influence, and so you cannot say, I think it will be different. You have to say which type of difference you expect. And then the last part of the alternative hypothesis is the explanation. And so the explanation needs to both explain the details of what you changed and explain the details of why that will impact your response variable. And so here, it says the corn syrup and strawberry jam is mostly glucose. And so that tells me the details of what I have changed. Instead of giving sucrose, I've given glucose. And then here is how that will, impact the response variable, the thing I'm measuring. Having mostly glucose should allow the yeast to grow faster than the table sugar. Okay, so your rationale or your explanation needs to connect to both the explanatory variable, the thing that you changed, and to the response variable, the thing that you measured. For another example of this, we're going to look at the person D notebook directions, also in your lab manual, but in a different part. So person D is responsible for writing the conclusion. The conclusion is just like the alternative hypotheses, except now you have actual results instead of predicted results. So for person D, there's both a good and bad example of conclusion. You want yours to be like the good example, okay? So the good example of conclusion tells, here is what happened. That matches with what we expected, or if it didn't, you could say that does not match with what we expected, whatever. And then you have the explanation, okay? So in this case, the thing that got changed was, again, the type of carbohydrate. So the control jar has white sugar, the experimental jar has raisins instead of sugar. And then the response variables that got measured were SCOBY thickness and amount of fizziness. So we are expecting the explanation to talk about raisins and white sugar and to link that back to SCOBY thickness and fizziness, okay? And that is what we see. So we have, this is what we expected. This is analogous in the alternative hypothesis to like the direction, like we expect more or less. So this is what we expected, or this is not what we expected. And then here's the explanation. So this describes the change to the explanatory variable. So raisins contain these sugars, white sugar contains this sugar. So that's the difference that we've made. This is the part of the explanation that connects to the change that we've made. And then the second sentence here is the part of the explanation that explains how the change to the explanatory variable is going to impact the response variable. So yeast and bacteria can more easily digest monosaccharides, which will give us a thicker SCOBY and more bubbles, since what we measured was SCOBY thickness and fizziness. And so it's really important when you're writing your conclusion, you'll recap the results, you'll say if it's what you expected or not, and then you'll write the rationale or the explanation that talks both about the explanatory variable and connects the change in the explanatory variable to the response variable that you measured. Okay? So in these less successful examples of conclusions down here, some pieces of that are missing. The one that I mostly want you to look at right now is this third one. And so this says our experimental kombucha has a thicker SCOBY, was more fizzy than the white sugar one. Okay, so they're recapping the results. Excellent. This is what we expected. Great. Because the raisins contain glucose and fructose, while white sugar is a disaccharide. So here, that section of the second sentence talks about how the explanatory variable was changed, but there is nothing written to connect that change in the explanatory variable back to how it will affect the response variable. So the reader is not able to understand why this is what the experimenters expected. And so you want to have enough written that the reader is like, oh, that makes sense. I can see why this is what you expected, because you have something about the change that you've made to the explanatory variable, and you also have something about how that change to the explanatory variable will impact the response variable. That's what you need to get all of the points in the alternative hypothesis explanation and in the conclusion explanation.